Welcome to On a Darker Note. If you're a weirdo like me, give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. This is my new series where we're looking into the traits of zodiac signs and then a killer that falls underneath that sign. Aries are the first sign in the zodiac, with the dates ranging from the 21st of March to the 19th of April, and are represented by the ram. There is a belief that each house learns from the one before. Being the first sign in the zodiac, Aries do not have this luxury, and therefore they often enter situations blind, but they are referred to as the baby of the zodiac. They are brash and trigger-happy and impulsive, and have a do-first, think-later mentality. Ruled by Mars, Aries are known for having an explosive temper that is normally short-lived. They like to do things by themselves and have a competitive nature when with others. Herbert Mullin was born on the 18th of April 1947 in Salinas, California. His father was a war hero who became a salesman once the war ended, and while he was described as strict, there were no reports of him being abusive to Mullin. When Mullin was 5, the family moved to San Francisco. While in high school, he struggled with schizophrenia, but despite his struggles, Herbert was described as popular, with a girlfriend, many friends, and was on the football team, and was even voted most likely to succeed. In 1965, he graduated high school and went on to college to study engineering, as he was considering a career in the military like his father. But shortly after his graduation, his friend Dean Richardson was tragically killed in a car accident. This changed Herbert's path. He became obsessed with Dean, building a shrine to him, which he would sit with every day. He became fascinated with the idea of reincarnation and began to believe that Dean's death was part of a great cosmic plan. He then changed his college major to philosophy before withdrawing entirely in 1967. By 1968, he had split from his girlfriend after she was beginning to believe he was gay, and this year he had his first sexual experience with a man. A year later, he was committed to Mendocino State Hospital by his family, but he didn't stay there long. He floated between jobs, never settling on one determined career. He believed in the legalization of drugs and used marijuana and LSD. During this time, he was hospitalized several times and diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic, which was aggravated by his drug use, and was put on antipsychotic medication. He was in and out of medical institutions and intermittently took this medication. In 1969, he pulled a knife on a park ranger, which led to him being placed in jail but not booked. Following March, he moved to a commune before moving to San Francisco for a short time, but by the September he moved back in with his parents. He believed he heard voices and reinvented many personalities, including a boxer, a yogi, a hippie, and bizarrely a Mexican, despite not actually being Mexican. He claimed he was bi everything, and that apparently included biracial. Herbert's search for a personality was to give him a sought-after piece in his mind, but he never settled on one until he decided he wanted to be a murderer. The voice he was hearing was that of his father, and he was allegedly telling Herbert to kill. He believed that after the Vietnam War, the amount of Americans killed in action was enough to be a blood sacrifice to nature that would stop destructive earthquakes. He was fascinated with earthquakes due to being born on the anniversary of the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. This had a magnitude of 7.9 and destroyed over 80% of San Francisco and claimed over 3,000 lives, making it the deadliest earthquake in US history. He had convinced himself that he was the world leader, and it was his duty to maintain the prevention of earthquakes, and by killing, he would cause a death toll to equate that of the San Francisco earthquake. The first killing happened on the 13th of October 1972 near Felton, California, which was his hometown. He spotted 55-year-old Lawrence White, who was an unhoused person, whilst driving down a quiet road. Herbert stopped his car and opened the bonnet, pretending that he had issues. Lawrence came over, offering assistance to fix it in return for a free ride, when Herbert pulled out a baseball bat and bludgeoned Lawrence's head. He then pulled the body into the nearby woods, where it was found the next day. Just 11 days later, on the 24th of October, Herbert picked up 24-year-old Mary Guilfoyle, who accepted a lift to an appointment she was late for. While he was driving along, he stabbed Mary in the chest and later mutilated her body. He scattered her body along the road, and she was not found until the following February. He was then beginning to doubt the voice he was hearing was his father, and decided on the 2nd of November to attend St. Mary's Catholic Church to confess his sins. Father Henry Tomei listened to his confession, and once the session had ended, Herbert assaulted the father and fatally stabbed him in the heart. He would later claim Father Henry volunteered to be his next victim. A witness had seen a young man dressed in black struggling with the priest, but there was no further visual identification. However, there were fingerprints left at the scene. He then tried to join the Coast Guard, but was denied. After this, he stopped taking his antipsychotic medication entirely and blamed his previous drug use for all of the issues in his life. He originally planned to kill a drug-using friend, John Hooper. He went to his house carrying a knife, but there were other people, too many people, at his house at the time, so Herbert changed his mind. He then decided that he needed to change from a knife and proceeded to buy a gun. Herbert then attempted to join the Marine Corps, but he was denied after he refused to sign the Criminal Record Declaration. He then decided the first person to introduce him to marijuana was to blame for everything wrong in his life. This was an old school friend named Jim Gianara. On the 25th of January 1973, he drove to the last location he knew Jim to reside at, where he found Kathleen Francis, who happened to be a friend of Jim's. She directed Herbert to Jim's cabin, which was further down the road. When he got to Jim's place, he demanded to know why he gave Herbert the marijuana that was the catalyst to ruining his life. He then pulled out a gun and shot Jim, but didn't kill him. Jim dragged himself to the bathroom where his wife was, yelling at her to lock the door. But unfortunately, Herbert managed to break it down and fatally shot Joan. Jim also succumbed to his wounds, and Herbert then stabbed the bodies post-mortem. Leaving the cabin, Herbert returned to the original property where Kathleen was with her 2 children, 4-year-old Damon and 9-year-old David. He fatally shot all 3 and stabbed them in the same manner as Jim and Joan. On the 6th of February, Herbert was hiking in Santa Cruz Island when he came across a campsite. 4 teenagers, 15-year-old Mark Drabellis, 18-year-old Robert Spector, 18-year-old David Oliker, and 19-year-old Brian Scott Card were camping illegally in the park. Herbert went over, pretending to be a park ranger, and told them they had to leave because they were polluting the area. But the boys refused to listen and did not leave their tent. Herbert left, but returned the next day with a .22 caliber pistol and shot all 4 of the boys. He then stole $20 cash and a .22 caliber rifle the boys had. Just 6 days later, on the 13th of February, Herbert committed his final murder. He was driving along the road when he saw 72-year-old Fred Abbey Perez. Turning back on himself, Herbert drove past Fred again and shot him in the heart with the rifle he had stolen from the group of teenagers. However, Fred's neighbour saw the entire killing and even managed to get Herbert's license plate. Immediately contacting the police, they found Herbert where he willfully pulled over and was arrested. The arresting officer found both the rifle and his pistol in the car with him. Due to Herbert using different methods to kill and a lack of pattern in his victims, police did not originally connect the killings together. Due to Jim's involvement with drugs, they originally thought his killing, along with his wife and those of Kathleen and her young boys, were the result of a drug deal gone wrong, and originally blamed Kathleen's husband, but he was cleared of any charges. During questioning, Herbert declared silence to officers who were asking if he wanted an attorney, and repeatedly said silence, silence, silence. Upon searching his residence, they found newspaper articles about the murders. The guns that were found in his truck were sent to ballistics, where they determined Herbert was responsible for the killings of Jim, Joan, Kathleen, Damon, and David. He was originally charged with these 6 murders, until the bodies of the 4 teenagers were found a week later, bringing his charge count to 10, which he admitted guilty to. At the same time, infamous killer Edmund Kempner, known as the Co-Ed Killer, was operating. There was confusion at the time as to whether Herbert was also responsible for these beheadings, until another one was committed while Herbert was detained, confirming that there were 2 killers in the area. This led Santa Cruz to be known as Murderville. He was tested for legal sanity, but it was proven he had premeditation with the first shootings. He was diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic, but it then needed to be determined whether this was the reason for him killing. While awaiting trial, the Co-Ed Killer was caught, Edmund Kempner. The 2 killers were placed in adjoining cells, and they did not get along. Both believed they had their own missions for their killings and that the other was just a senseless killer. On the 3rd of July 1973, trial finally began. Despite Herbert pleading guilty, the plea was entered as not guilty on grounds of insanity. James Jackson, Herbert's attorney, was quoted, "Make no mistake, Mr. Mullin hears voices, and the voices told him to kill. The acts were not acts of murder, but acts of sacrifice." Herbert showed no emotion during the trial and rocked back and forth in his chair. During the trial, it was determined by psychiatrist Dr. Donald Lundy that Herbert had devised his earthquake theory before the killings, not after. He believed this was the motivation for them. Herbert also accused his father's repression of his homosexuality as the reason for the killings. He blamed his father directly, while the prosecution blamed the hatred he had for his father. Herbert claimed the voice of his father told him to kill because his father himself was a murderer from his service in the Marines, and said that his father taught him that violence was normal. Once on the stand, Herbert blamed everyone in his life for his actions: family, friends, teachers. He said he was the leader of his generation because Einstein died on his birthday. He also wanted his father removed from the courtroom. The judge denied his request. Herbert did, however, admit to ignoring the voice's orders to kill sometimes, saying he ignored the voice back in December. However, this only proved that he knew some difference between right and wrong. The prosecution argued that if Herbert was insane, he would not have covered his tracks. Despite the previous psychiatrist's statement, they insisted the earthquake theory was devised after the fact. It was obvious Herbert was mentally ill. It needed to be proven whether he knew right and wrong. After 14 hours of deliberation, the jury came to a verdict. Herbert was found guilty and sane of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 9 counts of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison in Santa Cruz County with possibility of parole in 2025. He applied for parole on the 19th of March 2021, but was denied as he still continued to blame others in his life, and the judge determined he continued to pose a threat to the community. He extended his sentence by 7 years, and he was not eligible for parole until 2028. But on the 18th of August 2022, it was announced that Herbert died at the age of 75 of natural causes at California healthcare facility. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Do you think Herbert really heard voices and believed that he was getting sacrifices for the earthquakes? If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button.